Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I want to continue our series of videos showing how to visualize the state of an aircraft that's being simulated by Simulink. In particular, today we're going to focus on interfacing Simulink with X-Plane. So if you've been following along with the series, you've seen that I previously did two videos showing how to use two separate visualization systems, namely Simulink 3D animation and flight gear, to perform the visualization task. If you haven't seen these two videos, please take a moment to watch these, as I'm going to assume that you're familiar with these concepts, and therefore I'm going to move a little more quickly through this video so we don't rehash old material. Assuming that you're all caught up, let's jump over to Simulink. So here's the same Simulink model we were working with last time when we wanted to use either Simulink 3D animation or flight gear to visualize the system. So basically we want to do the same thing, but instead of using flight gear, we want to use X-Plane. And X-Plane is just another flight simulation package which actually has incredibly nice visuals. So what we need to do is we need another block down here which is going to send the position information and the attitude information of the vehicle. Now, instead of sending it to flight gear, we want to send it to X-Plane. Now, unfortunately, if you come here into the aerospace block set, right, and then flight simulator interfaces, there's nothing here that talks about natively sending something to X-Plane. So we're going to have to do a little bit more work. We're going to have to basically build our own custom block down here, which is going to consume the position and attitude information of the aircraft and send it to X-Plane. So from a block diagram perspective, the game plan is to start with our aircraft simulation in MATLAB/Simulink and then build our own custom block that will package up the position and attitude information and then send it via a UDP packet to X-Plane 10. Now, one minor complication is that we need to write some software that's going to allow X-Plane to accept, decode, and then use this information correctly. We're going to do this using what are called plugins. We'll basically build our own custom plugins that will allow us to override the default behavior of X-Plane. So we're going to actually need to build two separate plugins. The first one needs to disable X-Plane's native physics engines because if you think about it, we don't want X-Plane solving for the states of the aircraft because that's what we're doing in our Simulink model. Once we've disabled the physics engine, the next thing we need to do is have X-Plane listen for the UDP packets and then set the position and attitude of the aircraft in X-Plane to the values that are specified in that UDP packet. Now, note that the plugins that we're going to build target a specific build of X-Plane, which is why I've denoted this as X-Plane 10, the 32-bit version. So as such, this is the version that we're going to need to go download onto our machine. Alright, so to get X-Plane 10, why don't you go ahead and start a browser and head over to x-plane.com, and you'll notice that they're actually all the way up to X-Plane 11 as of this posting. So in order to find older versions, let's go down and click on the Try the Free Demo or the Try It button up here. And what we're going to do is scroll down. We don't want X-Plane 11. If you keep scrolling down, here we go, older versions. This is what we're looking for, is the older versions download page, so I'll click on that. And here we go, X-Plane 10. This is what we're looking for. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and download for Windows X-Plane 10. And this is going to take a little while, so we'll come back in a second. Alright, so it looked like that download finished, so let's go ahead and check out what we've got. Alright, so it downloaded the zip file, so I'll just go ahead and extract the zip file. And once that finishes extracting here, we'll just open it up and we see we've got an installer.exe, so let's just double click this guy to run it. Alright, so here's the installer, and actually it noticed for me that I actually already have X-Plane installed on my machine, so I don't need to do anything. You may need to, if you're just following along and don't have X-Plane and have not purchased it, you may need to, I assume this will give you an option to install a demo, right, because it says right here, gives you, this is what we're doing to try to install a new X-Plane 10 demo. So I'll let you do that. I'll also call out that if you did purchase X-Plane, I believe this is where you can go ahead and add or remove scenery. That may come into play a little bit later when we're flying around. So anyway, this is about as far as I can show you right now, but I'm going to assume that you're able to go ahead and get a demo version of X-Plane 10 installed using this workflow. Alright, so here's what my folder structure looks like after I finished installing. So I decided to put my X-Plane in C, X-Plane, X-Plane 10. And down here there's X-Plane.exe as well as the 32-bit version of X-Plane, which is actually what we want. So you should be able to launch it by just double-clicking on the X-Plane 32-bit.exe. And let me drag this over and open on another screen. Oh, it's a little bit pause. Here we go. And probably one of the first things you're going to be greeted with is it's telling you that there's an update available. Make sure you do not upgrade. We want to stay on X-Plane 10. So click Not Now. And this should go ahead and do a little bit more loading. And eventually we'll get to a splash screen where you could fly normal X-Plane. So here we are. So here's your splash screen. You can pick where you want to fly here. For example, actually that's perfect. Boeing Field. That's actually very close to where I am. So let's just go ahead and use that. You can pick your aircraft, pick time of day. So this is the basic launcher and splash screen. So if we click fly with these options, we're basically just flying X-Plane like a normal flight simulator, right? It has nothing to do with MATLAB Simulink at this point. So that's what we need to fix. You could fly with this just for fun and for giggles right now, but we need to make these plugins that we're talking about so that we can actually override the behavior of X-Plane and have it start listening to MATLAB and Simulink for state information. Luckily for us, there's an entire software development kit, or SDK, that's dedicated to writing custom plugins for X-Plane. So here's the main page for the SDK, and I'll leave a link to this page in the description of this video. So you can come here and you can read things like documentation and look at example plugins showing how you can add custom behavior to X-Plane. And the most important part, though, is the ability to go ahead and download the SDK, which you can then incorporate and include in your own C code projects. Which is exactly what I've done here. So this is my Visual Studio solution that contains several projects. And each one of these projects builds a separate plugin to enable some custom functionality in X-Plane. So, for example, the ones we care about is this one right here that I made. I called it UW Disable Physics Engine. So if I look into here and look at the source code, you see it's actually pretty darn simple. I'm just going to leverage the SDK that we just talked about. And it provides a lot of functionality. For example, if I scroll down here to look at the plugin start, it's going to allow us to go ahead and assign a hotkey. So in this case, I'm going to assign F9. And F9, when the user enables this plugin in X-Plane and then presses F9, it's going to activate whatever this plugin does. And if we look at the hotkey callback for what this is actually doing, what you're seeing is actually pretty darn simple. All I'm doing is I'm literally going ahead and disabling the physics engine. So the SDK makes it very easy to do this. So hopefully when I make this plugin, compile it, put it into X-Plane and press F9, this will go ahead and disable the physics engine. Now, once we have the physics engine disabled, like we said, the other thing we need to do is start listening for UDP packets. So I made another project here. I called it UW Timed Processing UDP. And it's a very similar functionality. And basically what this does is I've set it up so that it listens for UDP packets at a certain rate and just process those packets like we talked about. So again, we scroll down, we can take a quick look at this. Again, in this case, I've assigned F5 to activate this plugin. So again, when the user presses F5, if this plugin is active in X-Plane, F5 will activate this particular plugin, and it will basically start toggling to listen for or stop listening for UDP packets. And again, it's pretty simple. You can go look at the callback for that hotkey. And where did I have that? Flight loop callback. I guess this one's a little bit more involved. Yeah, basically I start listening for packets or I stop listening for packets, and then I handle that appropriately. If you look at some of the rest of the source code of my plugin here, you'll see basically all I'm doing is I'm spinning up a UDP socket and listening for the appropriate information coming across that packet, and then I'm going to go ahead and just set the state of the X-Plane vehicle to whatever values are heard across that packet. So what I could do right now is I guess I could switch this to a release build and then go ahead and build the disable physics engine and the time processing plugins. So you definitely could do that, although to save some time, and I'm sure not many people are going to want all of my source code, they kind of just want the output deliverables. So what I've done is in the description of this particular YouTube video, if you look, there'll be a URL that sends you to a zip file, and that zip file, I'm going to put in all of my compiled plugins and other necessary files for this particular tutorial today. So the one you're going to want is once you go ahead and download the X-Plane files.zip and unzip it, if you come into the compiled plugins folder, you'll see that these are the two plugins that are output by my Visual Studio project. So really, you don't need all the source code and all the SDK and all that kind of stuff. You really just need these two plugin the compiled versions of the plugins. So let's go ahead and copy both of these and take it over to X-Plane and paste it into an appropriate location. Okay, so that appropriate location is actually pretty easy to find. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to wherever I decided to install X-Plane. In my case, it was C, X-Plane, X-Plane 10. And if you come into here, you should see a folder called Resources. And then if you go in there, you should see another folder called Plugins. So if you go ahead and open that folder, all we need to do is now take my compiled plugins that disable the physics engine and start the UDP listening. And I'm going to copy them and literally just paste them into that location in X-Plane. And we should be ready to go almost. All right, so now that we've got X-Plane configured and ready to go, let's turn our attention back to our MATLAB Simulink model. So here, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the contents of the zip file that I provide. So we just looked at the compiled plugins. We saw where to put those in X-Plane. Now let's take a look at this this Simulink block that I provide. So if we just open this up, you'll see that it's one block. And it's a really darn simple block. You basically give it a 3x1 vector of the Euler angles and a 3x1 vector of the geodetic position. And if we look under the hood, all this thing does is it packages it up into a 6x1 vector and then uses a function called send position orientation to X-Plane over UDP to send those 6 pieces of information right here to a specified IP address and a specific port. So, what is this send position orientation to X-Plane over UDP? Where is that? That is actually the other M files that I provide here. So there's multiple M files. I may not have got all of them. So in the future, if I need to add M files to this list of dependencies, I will add them to the zip file that's provided. So when you download it, you may see more M files than what I'm showing here, but if so, just grab all of them. So in this case, I'm just going to grab these 2 M files that I've provided and written, and I'm going to copy them, and I'm just going to paste them into the working directory of wherever I'm doing all my MATLAB Simulink work. So that happens to be right here. Okay, so now we've got all the dependencies in place. All we need to do is come back to this block that I provide, right? This is basically the visualization block. So all I need to do is drag this into my RCAM model. And you can see that this is basically doing the same thing that the flight gear pre-configured 6th-off animation block was doing from the aerospace block set. Except now it's going to send it to X-Plane. Okay, so what we need to do is let's go ahead and just get this guy wired up. So we see that we just need a mux, okay, with 3 inputs. And we need to hook up, what is it, phi, theta, and psi. And those are the first 3 inputs here. And then we need a 3x1 vector of geodetic position, which was right here in our model. We already had that. So let's go ahead and hook that up, save this, and we're pretty much ready to run. So let's go fire up X-Plane and get X-Plane ready to listen for the packets that we're eventually going to be sending via this block. All right, so let's launch X-Plane. Back here at the X-Plane root directory, remember, we had already put our plugins here inside the resources/plugins folder. And those plugins that I built, they are targeting the 32-bit version of X-Plane, not the 64-bit. So make sure that we launch the 32-bit of X-Plane by double-clicking on the xplane-32bit.exe. And again, this brings this up, and it says there's an update, but we do not want to update. I want to stay with the X-Plane 10 version. So we'll give this a second to get to the launcher. Okay, and here we are at the launcher, so let's just go ahead and pick an airport. So since I'm using the demo version where I don't have a lot of scenery installed, I believe it installs scenery, near Boeing Field-ish, kind of in Seattle. So let's just stick with Boeing Field, King County International Airport. That looks great. And let's stick with the 747. We'll maybe play with these later. In terms of the other options, tell you what, let's fly here at sunset, actually, with Broken Cloud. So let's go ahead and fly with these options. And now, at this point, we are basically launching X-Plane. Again, remember, we haven't done anything special other than put those plugins in this folder waiting to be used. So right now, we're launching X-Plane like we're going to go play for fun in Flight Simulator kind of, normal X-Plane 10 simulator mode. Okay, so it looks like it's loaded, and we saw that it loaded, but then, gives us this warning that we're in demo mode since it didn't find the X-Plane 10 disk in the DVD drive, which is totally fine. Let's just go ahead and hit understood. Okay, so here we are sitting at Boeing Field getting ready for takeoff. Now, a couple of things we want to do here. First, let's just go ahead and make sure that it recognized and discovered that there were these two plugins, the UW Disabled Physics Engine and the UW Time Processing. So one way you can do that is if you come here in X-Plane and you hover near the top, you'll see there's this option that says plugins. If you click on plugins, plugin admin, and then plugin information, it will show you the plugins that X-Plane has recognized and is basically loaded and got ready. And yay, look at this. We see the UW Disable Physics Engine. That thing's ready to go. And so is the UW Time Processing UDP. So those are the two that we created. And I guess there was this other plugin that must have gotten loaded along with our 747. But, oh well, that's great. So we see the two that we're interested in up here. Now, the other thing we may want to do is let's put up some information on the screen so we can better understand what's going on behind the scenes. So to do that, what I'm going to do is we are going to come up to enable data views. So let's come up here and come here to settings and go data input output. Now, this is going to give us a whole bunch of information of stuff that we can actually display. So if you notice, there's 4 columns. So I guess the first column is the internet. The second is if you're writing to a disk. The third is going to the graphical. And the fourth is going to a cockpit display. So that's actually what we want. So what we can start doing is you can start adding some of these signals to the cockpit display. So for example, I don't know, frame rate. How about speeds? Mach, I'll just pick some of these things. Here, gear and brakes. That sounds interesting. This is critical. Pitch, roll, and yaw headings. So these are our Euler angles. Angle of attack, that could be interesting. Compass, sure, why not? Oh, here, lat, long altitude. We definitely care about that. I don't know, this might be interesting. Velocity traveled. Throttle actual. You could just start picking and choosing and adding, even like this control surface deflections, like ailerons, elevators, rudders. Sure, let's add all of those. Now, if you put the check marks in the 4th column for all these and then close the window, you'll see that all of this information gets written to the screen. So this is actually kind of fascinating. And a couple things to note is that a lot of these things are kind of wiggling around. So you can kind of see that basically, X-Plane's internal physics engine is simulating the state of this aircraft right now. So you can see that, yeah, the angle of attack is kind of varying, all this other stuff. Some of these numbers, they're hovering around 0. So basically, things are happening right now. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and see if I can activate the UW Disable Physics Engine to basically turn off X-Plane's internal physics engine. So I'm going to do this by pressing F9. So get ready. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, F9. Look at that. When I clicked F9, notice now the angle of attack, a lot of these internal states have frozen, but not for the other aircraft. You can see this other aircraft that's still moving. All we've done is frozen our own internal state for the aircraft. So the internal physics engine for our aircraft that we're sitting in has turned off. However, a lot of stuff is not turned off. For example, the frame rate, it looks like it's still going, right? It's still drawing everything. So we're almost ready to go. So what I need to now do is let's get ready and activate the UDP listener. So again, that, if you remember, we set that up to the hotkey of F5. So I'm going to hit F5, and in a second, watch these numbers up here, okay? So ready, 3, 2, 1, F5. So I pressed F5 and it paused. Right now, actually, X-Plane becomes a little bit unresponsive. So if you see here, it says not responding, right? It's sitting here hanging. The reason why is because we've activated that plugin, and the way I've written that plugin is it's just sitting there waiting for a packet to move the aircraft and warp it to whatever location is specified. So since we're not sending any packets right now, X-Plane is basically unresponsive. You can't click around. It's difficult to play with right now. If you wanted to quit at this point, you're going to have to taskmaster kill this process, or try to hard shut down it. But the reason is because it's opened up a socket and it's listening for that UDP packet to come in. So to get that UDP packet to come in, let's go ahead and start our Simulink model. Now to do that, I better make sure I've initialized all my variables properly. So I've got a script here to initialize everything, and I'm also going to warp it to this location. So you remember, this is our geodetic coordinates. So I'm using this coordinates of 47 degrees latitude and negative 122 degrees longitude, which happens to be around Boeing Field, right? Which is about where X-Plane is sitting right now. Although we're sitting on the ground at Boeing Field. Here, I want to put us 500 meters in the air, okay? So, let's go ahead, run this initialization script. Okay, it initialized all the variables. It opened up my model. Everything should be hopefully ready to go. Let me see. It's hooked into the joystick. And now, let's see. We're hooked in to the visualization package. So as soon as we hit play, hopefully what's going to happen is that we will send the relevant information, and then it will make its way to this block. The attitude and the position of the aircraft will then be packaged up as a UDP packet, and then that packet will get sent over to X-Plane, which is already now sitting here waiting. The plugin's activated. It's waiting to listen for those packets, and hopefully everything should be hunky-dory. So let's see if we can get everything on one screen, and we'll get ready to give this a shot. All right, so let me see if I can move Simulink off to one side, and then maybe we'll keep X-Plane on this side. And let's give this a whirl. So if I go ahead, get my hand on the joystick, and I go ahead and hit run on Simulink, give it a second. It's going to compile. It's going to get ready. And then it's initializing. Okay, now it's running. And hey, look at that. Look at that. See, X-Plane came back to life, and now things are moving. And look at this. We're flying above Boeing Field. So if I roll to the right, look at that. We get some response. This is awesome. Here we go. I'm going to roll back to the other side. And this is pretty darn great. Okay, let me bring X-Plane to the front, okay? Now, and also, what's interesting about this is, again, look at these data values. Look at the Euler angles, roll, pitch, and yaw. Those are accurate in the sense that we are computing those over here in Simulink and sending them over. But check out some of these other things, like angle of attack, angle of side slip. Those things are frozen constant because X-Plane's internal physics engine is turned off, right? We are not using those values from X-Plane. We're computing them over here in Simulink and MATLAB for sure. We've got angle of attack and beta and all these other signals that are needed to simulate the aircraft. But we are only sending over things like the Euler angles here and then the lat long altitude. So we see those things changing. So isn't this pretty darn cool? Look at this. We are basically flying around Seattle right now in our X-Plane simulator. Now, again, X-Plane is definitely cool. Let me while we're flying around, let me see if I can show you a couple other things. Oh, actually, hold on. This is going to time out. So tell you what, let's just fly this around for another couple seconds, and then I'll reset this, and we'll watch this again. All right, so it timed out, and then X-Plane, again, we see that X-Plane becomes unresponsive right now because the plugin is still active, and it's waiting for signals coming from MATLAB Simulink. So if we go ahead and start this again, okay, and we're back. X-Plane becomes responsive again. Now, let's go ahead, and I wanted to show a couple of things that's cool about X-Plane. So, in particular, you notice the level of detail is great. You see, look at that. There's individual cars driving down the freeway, so I think X-Plane does a real good job with this. Also, we can change the viewpoint. So, let's, how about where's our chase plane? Here, chase. There we go. So, now we've got a chase plane view of our 747 as we're flying around. There's also tons of other cool views. Like let's look at it from one of the towers. And now let me see. Now it's really hard to see what's going on because I flew so far away. But again, this is really darn neat, isn't it? There's all these different views you can use. Here, ride along. Yeah, this is awesome, right? And again, like I said, the scenery is just phenomenal, I think, with this. What is this here? Oh, runway. Whoops. Yep, this is the viewpoint from the runway. What else have we got? What is free camera? I don't know if I've seen that one before. Oh, okay, now it doesn't seem to be updating. Oh, because maybe it's just sitting there. Yeah, here we go. Look at this. A circle viewpoint. So, again, this looks really darn cool. And isn't this neat that we're basically flying the aircraft with our joystick and visualizing what's going on in real time while solving all of the states and all the dynamics are being computed in Simulink. Oh, and actually it timed out, so my Simulink model stopped. So again, X-Plane is going to become unresponsive. So maybe let me start my Simulink again, and let me show you one thing. So maybe what you may want to do is before the Simulink model stops. So right now the Simulink model is sending UDP packets. The Xplane plugin is responding, and everything is hunky-dory right now. So if I want to make it so Xplane is still responsive, what I need to do is I need to stop the plugin. So I'm going to hit F5 when Xplane is selected. So I'm going to make sure Xplane is in focus, and I'm going to hit F5 in 3, 2, 1, F5. And again, we see that the aircraft now becomes frozen in space. Simulink is still solving for the states and sending out those packets. Just Xplane's plug-in, we've just stopped listening. Oh, and look at that. You can even see this other aircraft flying around in the background. So this is kind of neat. So we're basically just paused here, and now if we stop Simulink, that's fine. Simulink has stopped sending packets, and now Xplane has not frozen. It's not unresponsive. So you can still see things are going on. Everything is hunky-dory because the plugin is just frozen. So we've stopped the internal physics engine. We've frozen the aircraft, and we are not listening for UDP packets. So now might be a good time to, maybe we could quit or do something else. Tell you what, before we quit, why don't we try moving the aircraft to another location? So keep in mind that right now it's sort of dark right now, and again, this is in Seattle, right? We put the aircraft above Boeing Field, so this is near twilight-ish, getting near dusk on the West Coast. What if we tried to warp the aircraft to the East Coast of the United States? Okay, so to warp the aircraft, all we need to do is update the initial geodetic position of our simulation. So I'll come back to my initialized variables, and let me just comment out the lat-long altitude for Boeing Field. And I've got another one here, which is a little bit south of the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast of the United States. So let's uncomment this. Let's run our initialization script again. So now we've warped the aircraft over to the East Coast. And again, I'll bring up Xplane. Now, what I should probably do in Xplane is I need to re-enable the plugin, right? Right now, the plugin is not running, so it's not listening for those UDP packets. So I'm going to hit F5. Ready? 3, 2, 1, F5. So again, you see now Xplane has frozen. It becomes unresponsive. It's waiting for those packets. So now let's come back over here and go ahead and hit go. Okay? And now what we're going to do is give this a second, running. Okay? Aha, now Xplane just discovered you're trying to take you out of the demo area, right? The demo region is just around Seattle, right? So KSEA, SeaTac International Airport here. So obviously, I guess they're going to make you buy the full version of Xplane if you want to get over there to the East Coast. You can still do this if you hit understood. Okay, and now it's going to try to load via scenery, and then look at this. What is going on? It's all black. The reason it's all black is, you remember, it was dusk on the West Coast. The East Coast was 3 hours ahead when we warped over there. It's now full-on night, so you may have to come here to environment and say time and date. Change this thing to, noon or, a couple hours earlier. And now, when we do this, hopefully, maybe the viewpoint is also messed up. Let's change the view to forward with panel. There we go. Okay, so now we are hopefully in the right spot. Of course, now I'm in some funky attitude. I don't know where I am. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. And now, though, if you notice, there's no scenery anywhere. So we've got a little bit of a scenery problem. And actually, tell you what, just so I can get a better orientation of what's going on, let's stop the Simulink model. Let me restart it again. Just so, okay, here we go. So now, you fly around, and this I don't see any Statue of Liberty. I don't see New York. Although, what's interesting is I do see, I think this is Teterboro Airport out in the distance. So it's got airport information for some of these other regions, but it doesn't have scenery. So if you want scenery for the area that you're flying in, you probably should buy the full version of Xplane, which would have all this scenery. That's probably the easiest way to go about it. All right, and while we're talking about additional scenery, we may as well talk about additional aircraft skins as well. So if you come to the Xplane website, I think if you click here on Extend It, there is, here we go, aircraft, model, scenery, plugins, all these other things that you can add. So I believe if you come here to this Aerosoft, they have options for you to go ahead and purchase, unfortunately, different types of aircraft. So you can do that, but they're not cheap, I've discovered. So I actually haven't tried this. If you try this, and I'd be interested to know if this works. So let me know. But anyway, here's an option on how to get additional aircraft For example, like we said, the Arcam model that we are flying is a 757-200, is a pretty darn close representation of it. So yeah, here we go. There's a 757 package, but again, it's not free. All right, and I wanted to show you one other thing as well. So I've been playing in this X-Plane 10 folder, but I've also seen different types of installs of X-Plane seem to give you a slightly different file structure. So, for example, here's another version that I got. I believe I purchased this one just the North American region or something like that. I can't even remember how I got this other version, but I've seen on other students' computers where you may get different sets of files depending on how you got X-Plane. So this one, for example, if you look inside of it, it doesn't actually have the X-Plane 32-bit. It just has plain old xplane.exe. That being said, if you still go ahead and go into resources plugins and stick in the 2 plugins that I provide and launch Xplane via this, in this case, let me pull it over. So here's X-Plane running, just like we've seen earlier. In this case, I don't think you have as many aircraft. Maybe I didn't purchase all those aircraft. I can't even remember. I think my lab did this a long time ago. But anyway, this is this version of X-Plane running, and we can still go ahead and hit F9. So I'll do that in 3, 2, 1. And yep, you watched all the alphas stop, all the state stops. We disabled the physics engine, and now you see the frames counting still up. So let's go ahead and hit F5 to start the UDP listening and watch these freeze in 3, 2, 1, F5. Yep, it all froze. And now if we come back to our Simulink model and hit run, hopefully everything still works in this version. Let me go. Yep, there we go. So, whoopsies. Yep, so we're still able to fly around Seattle and Boeing Field using this alternate version of X-Plane 10 as well. Okay, so I want to come back to our Arcam simulation, or our aircraft simulation, and let's step back and think about this a little bit. So what's going on, right, is we're flying the aircraft via the joystick. We're simulating the states of the aircraft and any signals that are necessary to be used for engineering or simulation analysis is all being done in Simulink. And now this is actually somewhat sophisticated in the sense that we are visualizing the state of the aircraft using either the scopes, using a Simulink 3D animation, using flight gear, or using X-Plane. So there are many ways to skin this cat here. And what's actually really cool about these 2 options, right, using flight gear or X-Plane, is actually we could even think about running flight gear or X-Plane or these flight simulation. These are basically just environment renderers, right? It's just drawing the environment, drawing the cars, drawing the trees, the airports, the lights, all that kind of stuff. We're doing all the hard engineering calculations back here in Simulink, but we're just using this as a glorified scope effectively to show what's going on. Well, you can run those on different machines if your one machine isn't beefy enough to run multiple of these. And in fact, you could even think about running different views for different things. So for example, let me show you an example of a setup that I made for a research project a little while ago. In this project, we were simulating an unmanned aerial vehicle that was equipped with a gimbaled camera that was able to pan and tilt independent of the main aircraft. Now, the aircraft was flown by a pilot who you see here is using the first joystick to control the aircraft and ensure that it flies a desired trajectory. So we use flight gear to visualize the state of the aircraft, as you can see here. Now, the second joystick was used by the payload operator, who was able to control the camera on board the aircraft. Now, we wanted a nice visualization for the environment to look for things like cars or buildings, so we used X-Plane for this visualization. Now, the thing that made all of this feasible is the fact that the flight gear visualization of the aircraft, the X-Plane visualization of the camera, and the Simulink model that's solving the equations of motion were all running on separate computers, and we were passing UDP packets around appropriately using the framework that we've just talked about in this video and several of the previous videos. So with that being said, I think this is a great spot to leave it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, I also hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. If you hit that little bell icon, you'll also be notified when we release more flight mechanics and MATLAB Simulink videos in the future. Please also leave a comment below if you run into any issues or just to let me know what you thought about the video. I really appreciate the feedback. I hope to catch you at a future video, and until that happens, I think I'll sign off for now. Talk to you later. Bye.